Hi guys, welcome to our YouTube channel, the IBT, and welcome to our new video. I'm Shayka, and today you and I will be discussing a very important part of the IB, and that is theory of knowledge. More specifically, we're going to be going into the TOK essay, as many students are confused on this and how to approach this. So this video will just be a breakdown of what the TOK essay is and I guess some tips on how to get that A. But before we begin, if you like this video, please like it, please subscribe. It helps us a lot as creators. But yeah, let's get started. And we'll start with what the TOK essay actually is. So what is the TOK essay? So the TOK essay is an individual assessment that most IB students need to do in their last year of the IB, and you do this alongside the TOK exhibition, which is another assessment. In my time, I did the TOK presentations, so this is a very recent change. And what happens in the TOK essay? So the IB releases a set of prescribed questions for each examination session, and they're all different. And what you need to do is select one of these questions and write an essay that discusses the different opinions in that question and ultimately attempts to answer that question as a whole. I say attempts to answer this question because, as you know, TOK never actually has a right or a wrong answer. So this essay has a 1,600 word limit, excluding footnotes, citations, and your bibliography. And it's super important that you don't go over this word limit. So the maximum is 1,600. I'm saying this because your IB marker will stop reading at 1,600 words. So it's best to play safe. That being said, the TOK essay is externally marked, and which is very unlike your internal assessments. So what actually happens is an IB marker somewhere around the world will mark your essay and give you a score out of 10, and that is with respect to a rubric. So in the description below, I have linked the TOK rubric as well as my TOK essay, which got an A, so that you can see if you want to have an idea of what the TOK essay actually is and an example. The primary purpose of the TOK essay is to discuss why we know what we know, and that is the primary purpose of TOK in general. But in our essay, we do this by investigating two areas of knowledge of your choice with the different ways of knowing that we learn throughout TOK in that 2-year period. So if you need a bit of refreshing, here are the different areas of knowledge and the ways of knowing. And the most important way we make this apparent in our TOK essay is by creating a really coherent structure to show the IB marker that we know what we're doing. And that's what we will discuss in the next video. TOK essay is essentially structured like any other argumentative essay. So there are 3 parts: the introduction, where you introduce your question; the body of your essay, where you put forward your arguments and your points; and your conclusion, which is a summary of the essay and your final opinion after discussing your points. So the introduction is, to a certain extent, a way of easing your marker into the question and trying to explain what your interpretation of the question is and how you're going to answer it. So a tip that I got from one of my TOK teachers was to always start with a quote or a definition of some sort. It could be from a dictionary or from a really reputable site, or it could be a very famous scholar or a poet, or even just a regular author from a book. Don't be afraid to find something wacky or really interesting, as this is what's going to engage your marker. I remember, I think for my TOK essay, I really like to read fiction, so I chose a quote that was sort of similar to, or very, like, I guess, indicative of my question, but it wasn't something really famous, or it wasn't something really deep, I guess. And this is because you want your essay to be more engaging. And your marker is going to be reading thousands of these essays, so you want yours to stand out. Your introduction is also the place where you introduce your subsidiary knowledge question. A subsidiary knowledge question is basically a question that needs to be answered before you can answer the prescribed question. And your SKQ is actually the basis of what you're discussing in your essay, not necessarily the prescribed question. This is because the prescribed question is usually very, very general, and it's really hard to discuss the prescribed question in 1600 words. That's why we use an SKQ to sort of narrow it down. An example of that is, for example, if you had a prescribed question that said, is this artwork beautiful? Your SKQ could be, what does it mean for something to be beautiful? And then your essay could discuss that. For my essay, I remember it was a question on provisional knowledge and when we could actually be fully confident in provisional knowledge. And my subsidiary knowledge question was, what makes us confident? After that, and this is very important, you have to state which areas of knowledge you're going to talk about in your essay. Make sure in your essay you're talking about 2 areas of knowledge. But in your introduction, it's really up to you if you want to be explicit about it. So you can either say, I am going to be talking about these areas of knowledge, or you could sort of integrate it in your introduction in a flowy manner. I don't think it makes much of a difference. Your IB marker just wants to see that you're talking about 2 areas of knowledge. So the body of your TOK essay is actually divided into 2 main parts, which is then divided into a further 2 parts again. So in total, your body should have 4 parts to it. So in your 2 main parts, you actually discuss your SKQ with reference to the 2 areas of knowledge that you chose. So for me, my 2 main parts were discussing my SKQ with reference to the natural sciences and history. And for each area of knowledge, you must have a claim and a counterclaim with relevant real-life examples. So what does that mean? What is a claim and a counterclaim? So in basic terms, a claim is the argument that is in support of the subsidiary knowledge question, and the counterclaim is the argument that is not in support for it or is against your claim. For example, so my SKQ was, what makes us confident and how confident can we be in the knowledge that we have? And for each of my areas of knowledge, my claim was that we can always be confident in what we know because of this certain method that scientists or historians use that make this knowledge reliable. My counterclaim was the opposite, so it was stating that there are times that we cannot actually be confident in this information or trust this knowledge that we have for these reasons. Now, for each claim and counterclaim, you must have a real-life example that supports that argument. The real-life example is actually a very, very important part of your essay, as it is essentially the evidence for your points. And like any essay, your evidence needs to be very, very strong. But you also need to be aware that there is a fine line that is really easy to cross when we are finding real-life examples for TOK. Because when we talk about real-life examples, IB markers are looking for examples that show how we know what we know in that specific area of knowledge. So, for example, my history real-life example was about comfort women in World War II. One way I could approach my real-life example is talking about the history of comfort women and what actually happened during that time. And the second way I can approach this real-life example is by talking about how the idea and the history of comfort women has been perceived in Korea and Japan, which are the 2 countries that were of interest in this situation. There is a difference. we don't want to be explaining the real life example or describing a historical event, but we want to talk about how historians have that knowledge and what historians do to trust that knowledge that they have. And we do this by talking about the ways of knowing in our essay. And this is actually where you talk about the ways of knowing. You talk about it through your real life examples. Another tip while writing your body paragraphs is to make sure to use the classic peel. So point, the evidence for that point, your analysis for that point, and then linking it to your point or to your overall question in general. So moving on to the conclusion of your TOK essay. So the conclusion is the final part of your essay, and it basically sums up what you have been talking about and your final opinion, where you link everything back to the prescribed question, which is the main question that the IB gave you in the first place, not your subsidiary knowledge question. I mean, you could talk about your subsidiary knowledge question, but make sure you link everything back to the prescribed question, because that is the main question you're talking about. I know that because of the word crunch, it's very super easy, and I feel a lot of people make this mistake to make your conclusion a couple of lines long. I know for my first draft, my conclusion was a couple of lines long, but it's not enough because it sort of ends your essay very abruptly, and as a result, your entire essay feels a bit rushed. The conclusion in your TOK essay is actually a little mini analysis of the question, and it's using the points throughout your essay to try answer that thesis statement you had put in the beginning. So in order to finish your TOK essay with a really strong footing, take your time to make sure your conclusion is really, really solid. Take the time to link everything back to your prescribed question. It's actually okay to talk about your personal opinion because that's what makes your essay personal. But as long as it's not the entirety of the conclusion where you're just talking about your opinion, you want your personal opinion to be a very small part. And I think that's all you need to do for the conclusion. I think that's all the tips that I could give you. So I think that sums up how you structure the TOK essay. Next, I'll be giving some general tips on the TOK essay that could, I guess, help you during the process that you're writing it, from the start, when you start planning, to the very end. Okay, so for the first tip that I'm gonna give you, my first tip is when you get all the prescribed questions, because your teacher or your TOK supervisor is gonna give you a list of maybe 5 or 6 prescribed questions to choose from, look at all of them. I mean, read them thoroughly and break all of them down. Maybe make a mini plan for each of them. And after you do that, choose the question that works best for you. I know it's time consuming, but when you break them down and sort of think of the ways of knowing and the areas of knowledge that you can use for each question, that really develops those critical thinking skills that is really required in your TOK essay and in the IB in general. And it's also really helpful if, I guess, in the middle of writing your essay, you realize this question does not work for me anymore. I think I need to change it. Because when you change your question, you'll already have, I guess, a little skeleton of what you want to talk about for the other questions. My second tip is submit a first complete draft to your TOK supervisor. As much as I'm aware, your TOK supervisor can see and give feedback to only one draft. So complete that draft and submit it, because while they aren't allowed to give detailed feedback, and that goes for your extended essay and your internal assessments, what they give back most of the time is still super helpful and will help you adjust your essay to get better marks. The more complete and the more finished the essay is, the more useful that advice will be. I remember my final submission for my TOK essay was completely different to my first draft, and I think it's because I changed a lot of the structure and a lot of the points. to the point where I don't even remember what my first draft was even about. So it's completely okay for your first draft to be terrible, because that's what the first draft is about. It's about writing out a really terrible essay, maybe showing it to your supervisor telling you this is really bad, you coming back and sort of reanalyzing and redeveloping your points. As a result, your points will become stronger. And at the end of the day, it's the final submission that matters. So don't overthink it too much when you're writing that first draft. Just write it out, bash it out, finish it, and just submit it to your supervisor and get that help. My third tip, moving on. No, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. Now, next tip. Choose areas of knowledge that interest you, but also at the same time have good sources you can find on the internet, so you're not spending ages just looking for one source. But the choosing areas of knowledge that interest you is super, super important. If you choose something that interests you, you're more likely to enjoy researching sources for it. And the TOK essay, if you don't like the question you're doing, or you don't like the areas of knowledge you choose, can become so time consuming and so boring that you don't want to write up the essay. And as a result, you're probably going to produce work that is of a lesser quality. So choose something that you're interested in. For me, my areas of knowledge was science and history, and I chose science because I was doing a very science-centric program. I took all sciences in my IB, and I think as a result I was able to link or get more real-life examples because I was already studying that specific subject or that specific area of knowledge. I chose history because I was interested in history, and as a result I could find sources on the internet that did interest me and that I could write about. And if you enjoy that, you'll enjoy writing your TOK essay, and as a result you're likely to achieve a better mark. My next and final tip is don't be afraid of reading exemplars of TOK essays before writing your own. Now, this does not mean you copy and paste that essay. Don't plagiarize, please. I repeat, don't plagiarize. The IB have a really, really rigid system of plagiarism, and sometimes even the smallest things count. But reading exemplars really helps to give you an idea of the different types of examples people use and the different types of structures, which can inspire you and help you to structure your essay. And I think that's really cool because that is what essentially helps you and gives you ideas. There are many exemplars that can be found on the internet. I know the IB official site has exemplars for everything from the TOK essay to your extended essay to different IAs. But there are also a lot of individual creators that have put their TOK essays and their different essays out there for you to read. With that being said, I think we've reached the end of our YouTube video for today. I hope this helps you, and yes, we'll see you in the next one.